Good morning, everyone, and welcome to PropTalk, your one-stop shop for all things multifamily. And I'm so excited to have our special guest, Sherry Freitas. Right? All right, I'm going to own that one. Joining us this morning. We also have a special twist. So, on PropTalk, we have the thought leadership and with Trailblazers, which is part of this series. And we also have cocktails and compliance. So, Sherry, move over cocktails and compliance. Cheers. Cheers to our morning podcast. Cheers. Yummy. And it's breakfast. It's hot. So, welcome to PropTalk.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming here.
I'm honored.
It is I'm really honored that you came and took time out of your busy schedule. And I know you're on a little bit of a hiatus, so we'll talk about that. But you don't live here, so it was still an effort to come here. And you're here during Resmania, which is extra special. So you're my first and only podcast recording at Resmania's.
Well, this has been a really fun week so far. I mean, the speakers that you've had and just being able to be included in it has been wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's just funny how fate brings people together because our histories, we have crossed paths, although we didn't know it. And I don't know, soul sisters, like our thinking, everything. We met at a conference not too long ago, and it was like, where have you been all my life?
I felt like we were best friends when I walked away. I was like, gosh, I've known her forever, but I really have only known you for like 3 hours.
I know, it was cool. But part of that, I think, has to maybe do with some like mutual respect.
Right.
And maybe because we were trained early on by the same people. But no, you've had an amazing journey, and I'm going to think we should just start with that a little bit. So if you'll tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your career journey into multifamily.
Well, I think like most people, I never set out to do this.
No one's ever said that before.
Yeah. I actually went to see looked for an apartment with my roommate and got interviewed. And actually, the regional manager was working that weekend and interviewed me and my roommate. We both got jobs. And I started leasing apartments at a high-rise building in Washington, D.C. It was rent-controlled. The residents had sued the previous management company and won. Oh my! So we had this tenant agreement we had to live by, and we used the word tenant because it was that kind of agreement. But so we basically were like on call all the time. And
oh my gosh!
My first 6 months, I remember I probably cried just about every day on my way home because it was almost a little of an abusive situation. But it taught me how to be really tough because then I got my confidence behind me and I was able to like respond instead of react to all of the residents. So that's how I got my start. My first manager told me I'd never be more than a leasing consultant. And that was really fun. So I basically got mad and almost quit, but then I went back and said, I'm going to prove her wrong. And that's exactly what I did. So I kept working through the business. I'm still really close friends with a couple of those people from back in I won't even tell you what year, but I've been in the business 35 years. So
well, I'm right behind you.
And so, I was kind of that person who did a lot of troubleshooting because I had that background. Like I was always trying to fix things. And so, they finally said, if you could go anywhere you wanted to go, where would you go? And I said, somewhere warm. And so I ended up in Florida. And that's really where it kicked off, is that I was put in a situation where I had to kind of turn a property around. And then they sold the property and they're like, move to Georgia. Figure it out. We'll figure it out. So I moved to Georgia and I kind of became their budget writer. And so I got really like in depth in all of the back kind of the house things. And then they sold my property and I was out of job. So that's when I went to work at Summit Properties. Yes, where I think we first crossed. But did a lease up for them, probably one of the worst lease ups that they ever did because the construction was horrible. And not that doesn't happen now, but it was really tough. And I remember the person interviewing me going, so you really want a challenge? Like, you really want a challenge? And I was like, yeah, I want a challenge. And so ended up doing that and worked for them for years and then moved into a regional role. That's really what kicked it off. I remember Bill Hamilton, who was the president at the time, came in my office when I was a manager and said, Sherry, what are you passionate about today? Because I always had something on my mind, and I was like, I need to be a regional manager. That's what I want to do. And he said, well, write me a memo. And so I did 4 pages later.
That's a heck of a memo.
Yeah, I told him what I wanted to do. So then I, just catapulted. And I always was the person who never said no, that I couldn't do something. I would always figure it out. I would kind of pretend that I knew what I was doing sometimes, but usually could figure it out. And
did you always go ahead strong into those situations, or did you get voluntold into some of those situations?
I mean, I think sometimes I was voluntold, but I never said no.
Yeah, well,
because
we didn't say no.
Yeah, you just, I wanted to move up the ladder, and every time I got an opportunity to do something different, I learned something. So that was really, I think that really came to fruition when I was at Graystar, and I went and worked on their strategic team and got to do a lot of really cool projects. And I mean, that was the unbelievable learning curve of my career, was really just having experience in short stay housing and, active adult. And I worked on their property operations committee and set policy. And then I was on the global team. So I got to do all these really cool things and learn from all of it. So that's.
Did you go from Summit to straight to Graystar?
No. So there was so I went to ING Clarion, which was a startup at the time. We started our own management company. They eventually bought Gables. And then I left there and went to Waterton for a brief period.
Yeah.
I was there with, I followed Greg Loznak, who I had worked with at ING. Mm-hmm. And then I went to work for Steve Wiley at Wood Partners because I had worked with him at Summit. Mm-hmm. And he was like, and this was 2007. So this is when the world is falling apart, kind of like, it's not falling apart today, but it was challenging. And
that was the start of the challenge. We didn't know we didn't know how much it was about to fall apart yet.
Yeah. I mean, we had 22 active lease-ups at the time, and we had 17 different management companies, and trying to get everybody to focus on it. And we were a merchant builder, so we weren't able to flip these deals. And so there were times that you really had to buckle down and figure out how you were going to, cash flow.
Mm-hmm. I was just talking to a supplier partner that integrates with Resman before we started this. It's funny you said that about that, because we just revisited, because back then we were in the same thing, cash flow management. We took to extremes back then. And this particular supplier, let's just say he was very flexible and forgiving for about 9 months, period. And we worked it out. But when I was talking to a group of our attendees out there, it's like, I know things are tough now, but there was a point in time where literally you were stretched out 9 months. Oh, yeah.
Well, I can remember a time I called the developer and said, we need to sell this property right now. Mm-hmm. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, okay, we could be 100% occupied today at the rates we're getting today, and we still could not make debt service. So we need to sell this thing right now. Mm-hmm. And so it was tough times. But so after Wood Partners, I went to Graystar and ran their Atlanta office, or Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama for a couple of years. Turned it around and got it profitable, which was fun. I'd never done fee management before, so that was a new taste for me. Well, I'd done a little bit here and there, but not enough to be not any of the new business development side. And then worked on the global team and, ran a systems team, which was very interesting. That's where another thing that we have in common.
Yeah.
And then went to Rangewater and spent a lot of time there. Rangewater grew really, really fast. And so just really taking a hard look at how we could backtrack and support the scaling that needed to happen. So, I've done a little bit of everything, but it's been fun.
Yes. Well, your reputation precedes you. I have known you from afar. That's why when I saw you on the panel and we got to talk afterwards, but I had no idea we had so much in common. And what's funny, I didn't even know this till you just said it about budgets. Because when I left Summit, that was my thing, which is probably why I designed Budgets Pro. Because when I left Summit, they horse traded me to ECI, which is based in Atlanta. Uh-huh. And I didn't even I was so naive still. I was very young. And they helped negotiate my salary. I didn't even interview. But Summit negotiated for me to stay on and finish budget camps for 2 more weeks.
Oh, how funny.
So when you said that, I was like, oh my gosh. I think there was something though about that Summit to me, I was sad to see it over time that it's not here in the glory days that we had there, because there was something special about the way they empowered their teams. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah. We are, what is it? Unit president concept.
Mm-hmm.
And, here's your fence. Stay in your fence. If you stay in your fence, you're fine. You make all the decisions. And if you step out of that fence, then you need to call somebody. And so the other thing about Summit was it was a REIT. And so that's when you really learned the ins and outs of finances and understanding how you could meet your forecasted goals, right? Like I had a property that I could walk in the front door any day of the week, and the manager and the leasing people could say, okay, we need to go empty the change out of the laundry machines and we need to lease 5 more apartments. We need to move in 2 of them, and we need to collect on, 3 application fees, and we'll meet our number. And I was like, this is great, because they just knew it all the way down to the penny, which was awesome. So,
well, this isn't our line of questioning, but I think you just hit on something really valuable, because it's interesting. When we were up on stage yesterday, we were talking about the changes in the economy from then and the great financial crisis to now. And we did the same thing. We went and got the change out of the fountains at Courtney Manor in Plano, Texas, because we were cut off from Otis Spuntmeyer and we wanted 1 more box of Otis Spuntmeyer cookies. And the maintenance supervisor was like, much change is out there? But things were that tough. But I think the thing, all joking aside, I think the important thing that you just said, and I wonder how that's being done today, is that intimate knowledge and empowerment of education about running the business. Because I would agree with you. What you just said, especially if you look at times like we're in today, how powerful it is to have an entire team that understands the P&L, that understands the budget variance. I'm not on the field anymore, but from your experience out there, do you think that's something that we're doing across the board? Or maybe is that an area that maybe people should be revisiting right now? And I
think we should revisit it. I don't think that we do a great job of it anymore. I think that technology is great, but it sometimes takes people away from. And I think the other thing is we've asked our managers and people on site to be experts in so many different things that we've really taken them away from some of the core business that we have, which is leasing apartments and taking care of our residents. And I think if we can get back to some of that and really focus and teach them how to manage the numbers. But I think people move through our business really fast right now because we've had a shortage of people. And so
kind of almost a complete turn, right? 70% turn.
The regional managers that we have today have never experienced the downturn. So they don't really know how to, we've got to teach them how to respond to those things and not just sit there and be bewildered of what to do. They've been, I hate to say this, but they've been fat and happy for the last 4 or 5 years, especially because they were order takers. And, if that person didn't lease the apartment, you had 4 more behind them that would lease. And, we were raising rents 21%. And if somebody didn't renew their lease, we're like, okay, I can fill it. And now it's really all of those basic things that we do, we really need to go back to.
Yeah, what is it they say? The true test of management is not how you manage in the good times, it's how you manage in the bad times. Right. I think there's a lot of, I know in our own base, we try to think about even our sessions here or how we think about our webinars. It's really understanding how many people have come into the industry post the great financial crisis, so that all they've seen is that upcycle.
Right.
And then on top of that, you have that 70% turn that we saw. I wanted to tap on that because I always like to look for nuggets in these things. And I think hearing from people here, just being out in the market, I agree with you. I think that's what's lacking. People don't understand the levers that they have at their disposal or how to think proactively and not just accept the loss, not just accept the miss.
Yeah, but they also have so much more going on. We didn't have reputation management.
Oh, yeah.
We had a website, but we worried about putting flyers in the apartment guide books at the thing on our page, right? Or turning our pages down.
Which really getting people. Never allowed to do, by the way.
Well, I know, we've heard. But we didn't have to look at all of these things all the time. And, we didn't have fraud.
Not like this.
Think about it. We'd roll in on Sunday mornings or Saturday nights and see the roll of fax paper on the ground with all the credit reports that we had run from the apartments we leased. That was our PII, right?
Yeah, just laying on the ground for anybody to pick up. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so there's just so many different things. And I think, we really need to take a hard look at and I think, the trends now with centralization, or as I call it, specialization, those things are very exciting because it gets us back to giving people a responsibility that they don't have to be experts at, 65 things. They can be experts at 25.
Yeah. What does it say? They're a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
And right now what they need is masters of domain experts right out there on site to help with these. I know in your career, now we didn't say this in the beginning, but will you talk a little bit about your title progression through your organizations?
So when I entered Graystar, I was a senior director.
Okay.
And then very quickly moved into a managing director role. And then I stayed a managing director until I left. Mm-hmm. But I was in so many different departments and had so many different responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And then when I left there and went to Rangewater's, when I became a senior managing director. Mm-hmm. And then when I left, it was executive managing director, which was, and I've never been a title person. We all put our pants on the same way. And, it's about how hard you work, and titles. It cracks me up because there's some people that are just like, I've got to have the title. And
now, so
to me, it's like what I'm doing is what excites me. It's not about what's on my business card or.
Yeah. No, and I know that about you. And part of what I was asking though is I think it's always good for women to aspire in this industry and to aspire to the heights. And I think that there's been so much change, and I love to see that. And I think we need to do more acknowledging it. There's still challenges in different areas and within different companies, but overall, there's definitely, you can see women being lifted up, and minorities being lifted up in the industry. So I have work to do. And it was always surprising to me when we were starting Resman and we would go out in the field. And I actually did some of the trainings in the beginning. I don't know that I was the best person to do it, but I did it. But I was always asked people, what do you aspire to be? And it was always interesting to me to see that women would aspire to the next role, whatever was directly above them. But then I would talk to men in the same room, and they are like shooting, for the free throw line and for the 3-pointer. That's very true. I know I was guilty of it too. And I'm like, so I just always wonder, how can we continue to help push that and have people to aspire to just think that it's limitless. And I think the more people see people like you and hear from you, that it's like, okay, there's a path. It can be done. It has been done. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that is a good point because, when I think about why I only aspired to the next role it was because all the leadership was men. You didn't see somebody like yourself in those roles. And so that was probably part of it. And I also, when you said something that kind of made my mind go, I go back to the fact that I'm not a title person. And when I'm in a social situation, a lot of times people will ask me, what do you do? And my response has always been, I'm in support. Mm-hmm. And because titles can mean so many things, and I don't want anybody to judge me based on a title.
Right.
I don't want them to think, oh gosh, she's like this. If it's a site person, I don't want them to think that they can't talk to me.
Oh yeah.
And so that's always been my response. And then I guess if I'm in a room of executives, I'm probably going to say I'm executive managing director. I'm not going to say I'm in support. Yeah. I think you're right. We didn't aspire to it because I just didn't think it was probably possible. And I still kind of pinch myself at times and be like, gosh, this has been an amazing career, because I would have never guessed right out of college that I would be doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. So, and still doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And still doing business. Yes. So you talked about the early on that somebody said you'll never be more leasing agent, which is just a crazy comment. That made me
a woman, by the way.
Well, I'm actually not as surprised by that. I had a few interesting moments coming up because I know this about you. You have an incredible work ethic. And like you said, you want to do your best and you like the challenge. You love challenges. Mm-hmm. So taking on and having that kind of work ethic around people who maybe don't can make people feel real insecure. It took me a while to understand that. And I try really hard to help other people overcome it because I'm not going to slow down and I shouldn't have to. Right. All right. I'm sorry, but maybe you should step up a little more. Yeah. Right. But I know that can lead to that. Mm-hmm. So it made me think about, in your career, what was the most influential moment for you?
There's been a lot. some of it is mistakes that I've made. And, some of it was around emotional intelligence because it was an emotional decision that I made that I was like, gosh, that was dumb. But it was how I responded to it that I think. So when I left Wood Partners, I was laid off at Wood Partners, and I loved that company. But they should have. I deserved to be laid off because I just didn't handle a situation very well. And so when I was starting to look for a job, I was like, okay, I've got to dig in here. Like, I've got to figure out, I've never had been without a job. Yeah. And so I handled it from the aspect of my job is looking for a job. And so I'm going to, hit the pavement, I'm going to network, and I'm kind of in the same role now as I look for the next role. But that was probably very impactful. I was in New York City on 9/11, and so I was with my boss at the time, and so I learned a lot about leadership from that experience and how do you respond from that, because it really shook up the world. And
yeah, I was in Texas. I can't imagine being there.
It shook me to the core, yeah. And wow, it kind of taught me to be a little resourceful. Mm-hmm. And I think that working for all the different companies that I did, some of them had a lot of great resources and some of them didn't. So we had to roll up our sleeves and create them. But I think, the bigger the challenges for me were always the situations where I learned the most. Having the opportunity to be on the global team at Greystar was really exciting because...
So tell everybody what that was about.
So
I don't know that a lot of people in the industry don't know what was going on or with NAA.
Well, I think everybody knows that Greystar has a global presence. And so this was, they were running a student portfolio in Spain. They were running a student portfolio in the UK. They had bought some assets in Amsterdam. We were developing assets in Chile and Brazil and Australia and China. It was a redevelopment in China.
Wow.
And so they had come to me and said, we were looking for somebody to kind of help these teams do business like Greystar does business.
Yeah.
And do it with the understanding that we can't do it exactly like it because the cultural differences, the differences in regulatory and just everything was somewhat different. But our business didn't exist outside the U.S.
Yeah.
So we had to, it was educating the public as to what we were. And so, and we have a very fortunate situation where we are is we know a lot of people that are in the business today. And I can call 5 people today and say, who do you know that might be interested in this role? And they can give me people. There was none of that out there, right? Oh, wow. We were like, okay, what industry should we go hit?
And I've heard that from the NAA Global Initiative, too, that it was like going back in time from property management. Like in some places, as about far back as like 50 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there's no fair housing. So like it was all condo rentals. Yeah. So, when an owner had a unit that was available, they basically advertised it and said, okay, at 5 o'clock on Thursday, we're going to show this apartment. Mm-hmm. And anybody and everybody could show up, and they would stand in the corner and they would take your name and they would watch you look at the apartment, and then the owner would pick who they wanted to live there.
It's definitely not fair housing.
Yeah. So, that was interesting. But so, I worked with the teams outside the U.S. to really kind of figure out how we were going to do the lease ups, help them get some kind of structure around how we were going to do business, making sure that we took the cultural aspect into effect. And we also didn't have support. Like we can call 20 different vendors to turn an apartment. There was none of that.
Oh, wow.
And so it was just...
That was a challenge.
Well, and just trying to think about writing a budget for a deal in a city that you have no vendors.
I don't even know the currency exchange.
Right. So, it was just this big learning curve, and that was very exciting. So that was influential mostly because it gave me the opportunity to see things through our team members' eyes. And a lot of them were like, well, we should try it this way. Because, I come in with baggage. Like, this is the way we've done it in the U.S. This is how we've done it for 25 years. And they were like, well, this maybe we should try it this way. And so it was just this fresh perspective that was really awesome. And so that makes my heart flutter a lot.
Yeah.
And so how do we look at things differently? And I think that Jake Wood, that was at Resman, their speaker yesterday, was very much in line with that. It's like, stop looking at things the way we've always done them.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing, like being so authentic about sharing a mistake. Because I think that is one of the things, as I was coming up too, there was so much anxiety about making a mistake. And I think part of it, I know for me, I was a single mom. I was dependent on my apartment. I was dependent on the daycare down the street. And it was a rock on my back. And it took me a while to learn how to let go of that. But it also kept me from like sharing good ideas or taking risks. But I also know about, like I said, falling and sometimes falling forward, even though it didn't feel like it at first. Yeah. Starting Resman, we didn't know anything about property management software business, like running a SaaS business. So when I tell you that there was some very costly mistakes, I probably cried a lot in the early days of Resman. So same thing.
We make mistakes all the time, but very rarely are they so big that they like take a company down. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do.
Maybe speak for yourself on that one. No.
Well, I think, when you think about our business, I mean, we take care of people and we make mistakes when we take care of people. We just got to back up and fix it. Just go back to the fact that it's about somebody's life every day. And so that if you keep that in mind, you'll make mistakes, but sometimes they're the right mistake.
Yeah. And sometimes those lessons you're meant to learn them.
Yeah.
It sets you up for a future path you do not yet see.
Yes.
I believe in that. So while you were also talking about your experiences overseas and thinking about fresh perspectives, and maybe it made me think about the times we're in now. And did you have thoughts about what you would was there anything from that experience you would bring back to the States and think about doing differently here, or that spurred new ideas?
I think technology was really always a part of what I think from a building technology perspective, they were a little bit further ahead. I also look at their construction sites and they were always spotless. Like our construction sites OSHA here is nothing compared to what it is there. I mean, I just can only imagine that the damaged goods that come out of a construction site is minimal there, because it was and I always had to wear steel-toed boots and, hats and all that kind of stuff. But that was interesting. I just think that being able to step back and really think about who your customer is and really where you're going to find them. Because they didn't have apartments.com. They didn't have these things. So we had to go figure out how to, a lot of shoe leather marketing, as I like to call it, is, how do you get people in your door? And websites were super important because that's where everybody was finding us. But, and I think the other part of it was I had not done a ton of student housing, but the student housing aspect it's a perpetual lease up, right? Yeah. And so you really have to make sure that you're focused on that core business all the time, because you're always thinking about where your next lease is coming from instead of, some of the other things that we...
No, but you just said something that's poignant, though. The mindset of being in perpetual lease up. Because I think one of the things that we've had a lot of staff churn out on site. We've also seen, like I said, maybe we hadn't invested in people like maybe we should have. And because it's not like the writing wasn't on the wall. Nobody thought double-digit rent growth was sustainable.
Right.
I always like how the press forgets to point out that there's also loss in 20 for most management companies. And if you look over a 3-year spread, it's not quite the same picture. If we think about how we should be back in engaging with our team members, what advice would you be giving to people right now that are out in the field about, if your regional managers, we're getting ready to host their next meeting or stand up, what advice would you be giving to them right now for this market?
Respond quickly. Answer the phone, respond an email, however they choose to communicate. I think that is probably the biggest thing, is that, and it also causes the biggest part of frustration on our residents and prospects if we don't respond quickly. But just think about all of the situations with residents that we could fix a lot quicker if we just didn't hesitate. So I think that's probably my biggest advice, because, the way people look at apartments, and I learned this from Virginia Love, but the way that people look for apartments today is so different. We used to look at 5 or 6 deals before we would make a decision where we were going to live. Mm-hmm. Now people look at a bunch online, they narrow it down to 2, maybe 2 that they're going to maybe go look at. And if they reach out to you and say, I want to come see your property, and you wait 2 days before you respond to them, that person has moved on. I think somebody said yesterday in one of the sessions I was in, if you haven't responded in 15 minutes, they're moving on.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that you've got something so that you're addressing those things? And I think that applies to when you have complaints or problems on a site, is that the faster you can respond, the more people know you care. And that I think is the bottom line secret of being successful in customer service, is showing that you care and being, expedient in how you're responding.
Well, and there's a lot of, and I don't have them on hand, so I don't want to misquote them, but there's several stats about what consumers are actually willing to pay for. There's one that was done by National Retail Consumer Reporting. But it talks about that. It goes back to things we learned in the beginning about objections to price are really just a lack of perceived value, and that people will pay more for what they value, and people value personalized, authentic, interactions. Even though it's funny, because in the pandemic, it's so much easier. You can do all this touchless, and you don't have to engage as much, and residents don't want that. Meet residents where they are.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't know, sometimes I struggle with that, because I agree. We need to have a certain aspect that's online, and now we're making ourselves readily available for them to self-serve when they want to.
Right.
But even
I hope
people,
so.
Yeah, and even people who don't think they want that interaction, I've had some residents over my time where when I was a manager, they were the introverts, but that one smile, that one, hey, how are you doing? They responded to it, and people you would never thought would come in the office, sometimes too much, would come start hanging out in the office. But people are they do want human interaction. That's what we actually are.
Well, and I think COVID really pushed that a little bit further, because people were so secluded for so long, and now they just, I can remember being Gladys Kravitz, looking out the window so I could see if somebody was walking by, because I was I need some interaction. But we have to remember, people want it on their terms.
That's it. Yeah.
And so we can't treat everyone the same way. If somebody wants a quick response via text message or email, that's fine too. Mm-hmm. Just make sure that you're not, add a little bit of nice fluff to it, because and that's something I have to work at. I'm a pretty direct person, so I usually type out an email and then respond, and then add in, hope you're having a good day. So I just get down to business. But I think we need to make sure that we're having those responses, and it's immediate. But, community is a big thing. Mm-hmm. Again, people want it the way they want it, but there's so many people that are relocating to different areas, and they don't know a soul. And so, your interaction with them, or you introducing them to one of their residents, that could be a game changer for them in longevity at your property, or just how their, mental wellness is what now we're calling it, how they respond to those kind of things. So I think it's a big thing, but yeah.
How do people, because I seem to recall the biggest challenge we had on our sites was how to get the residents to engage. Has that changed? When you would host community events, or how do you meet them where that, from your experience the last couple of years, how has that changed? How do we get residents to feel that sense of community effectively?
I think they have to be involved in it. I think that one of the things we miss the most is that we don't think about a lot of philanthropy on our sites, and a lot of our residents want to give back. They just don't know how to do it. And so if you can get them involved in maybe some kind of philanthropic kind of outing, or I getting their opinions of things.
Yes. Yeah.
I just think that we need to listen more. We expect we build these great fitness centers, and 20% of our people use them, right?
Hey, that's up. It used to be 10%.
Well, so we just really need to pay. We know that pets are a big part of our residents' lives. We should have a pet, event every week. Like there should be something going on, because that's one thing that, I have a dog, and I'll spend a lot of money on that dog and doing whatever I need to do.
Bark box. Yeah, I have one.
I've had those, yes.
But you have a great point about that. And thinking about even during the in my neighborhood, I have a backyard, but I still take my dog out and walk him in my neighborhood. And I know more pet parents than I know people that don't have pets.
Well, do we use our pet parks besides just, do we use them as an event space? Mm-hmm. Like that could be done. What do we have pet groomers? Like, again, it's about convenience too. Do we have pet groomers and mobile vets coming to our sites? And because that's, again, another great way for our residents to meet each other, because they're waiting for their turn, mm-hmm. right? I think there's going to be people you never see or never hear from because they're very well connected, or they're the biggest introvert in the world. And that's okay too. Mm-hmm. But again, it goes back to how you respond and how quickly, because if you have the opportunity to talk to people, you should probably take it and not just resolve their problem, but also figure out what's going on with them.
Yeah. So if we think like this time of year we're coming up, it's having, leasing cycles have kind of gone back to historical norms. We have a lot of leases expiring, right, through the summer months. So retention, right? Location, now retention. And by the way, it should probably always be retention. It's retention. But for those, those teams out there that know that they have this upward climb, they're facing really aggressive concessions with the, Class A assets, brand new lease ups that are in their area. Maybe they haven't been having all the touch points that they should have had. How do you guide a team to secure the renewals that they need to stabilize the properties financially? So how do you, when you've got this, because you have to pay your mortgage, like how do you advise them to navigate that right now?
I think that it's a lot harder for people to move when they have a community base where they're living. I lived in a high rise in Northern Virginia when I was first moved up there, and I didn't want to move because I knew everybody in the building. Like we all hung out, and that was my social circle, and try to figure out how to create some of those social circles. But I think that people want to know that when something goes wrong in their apartment, that we fix it. They know it's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. They don't expect perfection. So I think it's responding, but then it's follow up. It's it's those touch points. When I first started leasing apartments, the person who trained me said, "Sherry, if you want to be successful, know at least two things about every resident that you have, and it could be what their dog's name is. It could be that they have a sister in Iowa." I don't know. But then it gives you these talking points that when you see them, you can make that connection. Mm-hmm. And it's shocking to me how those people will be like, "How did you know that? Like, how do you remember that?" And I'm like, because that's my job, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's making those connections that we don't always do. And it's harder because some of the people show up and we've not even seen them, mm-hmm. And so it's being out on site. Like we've gotten away from being out on the property. Like I used to walk my property every morning when everybody was going to work. Yep. And I'd get to see them and talk to them at that point, right?
Just at the gates.
Yeah. But even if you were I lived on site, so I could walk around and see everybody. But, it's just trying to find a way. Like, when was the last time we walked through the pool area and just said hello to everybody? Mm-hmm. Instead of going, "Oh, you have glass containers, get it out of here," right? It's like,
no dogs in the pool.
Do it for the right reasons. Like go out there and be out there. And then when you know that people's renewals are coming up, go find them.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait.
Don't just send them the letters.
Yeah, don't. And if you're going to give them a big increase, don't just send them a letter. Call them and let's say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this because I know this is going to be a shock to you when you get it." And just talk them through it and talk about why you have. Yeah. It's just like you're teaching your teams why we have to do certain things on site. It's explaining that to residents. They get it. Yeah. Like they know.
I agree with you. I always found it, and I always felt like most of the people who lived in our properties had jobs. So that's how they got approved. And a lot of times you just sit down and it's like, yeah, we are running a business, and in your job, you have things you have to do. And I always found that was an effective way to talk about the renewal increase. And then we have to own, like if we messed up, we had to own it. Right. And so if you're sitting in my office and it's been, months and you're ready to give your notice, I'm trying to convince you to stay. You need to be prepared to acknowledge what maybe you haven't done and how things will be different. Like you almost got to prove up the value they're going to get. And then by God, you got to make sure you deliver on that next part.
One of the hardest things that is hard in property management, especially when you're on site, is saying, I'm sorry. The more you move through the business, you get the really angry calls from the residents where we really haven't taken care of somebody, or maybe we have and it just wasn't to their satisfaction. And I always have a policy that I don't ever give anybody anything. It's not my job to give somebody something. It's my job to listen. And so I will listen to a resident talk and talk and talk until they exhaust themselves. And then I say, my one comment back is, I'm really, really sorry we've disappointed you. And 9 times out of 10, that resident will say, oh, no, it's not your fault.
You're right.
But they just wanted somebody to listen. And so, and we don't end up having to give them anything, but it's just they just wanted to be heard and wanted somebody to care. And just by saying those couple of words, it gets the point across.
Yeah. No, I think that's a nugget right there. Like that was a great advice. And I think it goes back to really working with our teams on the soft skills and getting them comfortable talking to people. And I think they're just people, right? Like you said, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else does.
Yeah.
But they want to be heard. And I always used to joke too, because people get naked in there. There's nothing more personal. Like I always said it, and people, I always said it at our new hire orientations. It's like, but it set a precedent. Like this is not like anything else in the whole world that you can sell or position.
Yeah.
That's somebody's peace of mind, their safe space. At the end of the day, I don't know. I always thought that was special. Yeah. And I think you hit on something too. I think, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this, but hearing you describe how people should interact and get out there or be seen, get on the property, do the highs and the smiles and the, facial eye contact. It's special. And it, I think, will change the way our teams view the residents too. Because I do think there was some wear and tear coming out of the pandemic because of people were in their homes all the time. It's also a little bit different, I think, than we dealt with from what I understand. And when you talk to people, it seems like the way people communicate is so much harsher.
Yeah.
The social media world has still allowed people to, especially if it is via text or email, it can be pretty harsh. But it's harder to be that way in person.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. We always taught people to stand up and greet somebody when they walked in the door. I'm excited to see them, right?
Yep.
Like how many times you walk into a property now and they just kind of like look at you and you're like,
or stay on their cell phone.
Yeah. And if you have that environment where it's kind of exciting people want to be recognized. Like, so you're pointing out, you're, saying hello to them. I used to do the wave test when I walked onto a property to see how friendly the property was. You get on the golf cart and you're driving through and residents are driving out of the property. And I was always waving at them as they were driving out, and managers like, what is she doing? But I wanted to see how they reacted.
I love this.
Because sometimes they would be like, who is that? But if they're used to that friendliness, they wave back.
Oh, I love that idea.
He told me whether or not my people were out and about talking to people all the time. I mean, maybe I was wrong, but
I think you have a point.
The more you
it sets precedent.
I would drive through, and I'm looking for a house right now, and I drive through these neighborhoods. You see people walking, I wave at them because I want to see how friendly of the neighborhood it is. So I guess it's embedded in me, but yeah, it's about connection. And I laugh because when I walk into a retail store, I'm on a mission because I don't want to be there very long. And so, people will come up and be like, oh, can I help you? And I'm always like, no, I don't need any help. But if they come up and say, hey, how are you? I'm always like, I'm great. How are you? So it's a whole different thing instead of coming into my space. So I think we just got to get back to the soft side of what we do and being excited about that interaction.
Yeah. I love that, this whole segment. I think I can't wait for people to get to see it because I don't know that I see a lot of people out on site that love their residents.
Yeah.
And
they've been beat up.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
It does.
Because,
but there's a way to fix it. And I think
been beat up, and that's something I've learned over the years is like we've got all this baggage, but we assume that somebody's going to respond a certain way, or we see a certain resident coming in the door. We assume they're going to come in and be upset at us for something. We've got to get those assumptions out of our head because it could be completely
let go of the baggage.
Right. And so just treat every interaction as the first one.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll be different.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's important advice too, coming into the back half of this year, and people have some real challenging situations, and everybody's like, how are we going to compete? And I think that's great advice. I think people will be surprised when you can engage in a meaningful and positive way, and you follow through. I totally agree with the follow through. I'm going to talk about that on my panel here later about this afternoon. Residents will respond, and it's powerful when it happens. So we had a property once that had a pretty negative staff, and it wasn't market conditions. I don't know what happened. I don't know who did the hiring, but when we took over, it was just, I don't know. They were just not the right people. And we never let everybody go. We always kept everybody and gave them a full opportunity. It's your job. It's your job if you want it, but you have to earn it now that you're with us. I'm not just, and it was really interesting to watch as that team filtered out and new people came in place, and it just happened to be one of the warmest teams. There was a manager, Lasagna Harrison. I'll never forget her. And she was mama bear of the whole property. I don't even know how she did it. 332 units. But when that changed, you could see it. Like when we would go to the site visits, residents constantly coming in. And I always could tell too, because there was always like gifts. There was cookies, there was treats that residents would bring in. Yeah. And it's never perfect, but it definitely makes the job. And if that's your workplace, or that's our office is their home, why not make it as pleasant as possible? Absolutely. I think that still works. I'm glad you talked about that. Yeah. You brought up my inner cheese queen. Because I love that. I always, I love people. So I think my last question for you on the operator side, and thinking about our market challenges, how do you have a strategy that you go back to when you're looking at a property that, say, maybe you inherited it, right? You did take over and it's pretty low in occupancy. I mean, I heard somebody yesterday say a property that they just got a foreclosure was 30% economic occupancy, almost fell out of my chair. And of course, nothing's been done. Yes. But how do you look at short-term gains and the long-term stabilization of an asset? How do you approach that?
Well, I think you have to set goals. And I think that, and that helps your teams. They need to know, well, number one, they need to know what the overall goal is. Mm-hmm. But you can't just say, okay, if you're 30% today, we want to be 90%. Well, they kind of know that. But how do we get there? And what are the things that we need to do? And I think it's regular communication. I go back to the basics anytime something is not working. Do we have the right people? Mm-hmm. Are they well trained? Do they have the right resources to do the job? Does our property look good? Like, are we taking care of our residents? Are residents helping us to take care of the property? Do we have the right promotion? Are we actually getting leads coming in the door, and are we responding to them and following up? It's all basics. Price is the last thing. Like, I hate to touch price. Like, I like money. And so, it's always,
you need that to pay the bills.
Right. It's about getting as much of it as you can, but really making sure the whole team understands it, but like setting those goals and then celebrating as you go along. Like, go back to the days of my leasing. I think we had a cowbell that we rang every time somebody leased an apartment, but how do you celebrate and set those little kind of bite-sized goals along the way? Because it can be daunting if you tell somebody that you need to lease 75 apartments when it is. Can really go back and say, hey, I need you to lease 7, which means 1 a day. Mm-hmm. And so how do we get those 7, and who's going to be responsible? I always used to challenge our teams, like, how many are you going to get and bring to the table? And then you get that inner competition with teams. But, I think overall it's just about basics, because those don't really change. But I think we've gotten away from training and teaching people those basics on how how to get there. Because especially if they were hired in COVID and we've been 97% occupied for, which no one wants to be 97%. I mean, I guess there's a few people, but I don't want to ever be 97. Your rents are too low if they are. But how do you get there? And then making sure that you're keeping them on track. And so I think goal setting, and I know that sounds like the standard answer, but it's the truth. It's how anybody should do. If you have somewhere you want to go, whether it's personal or there's a financial goal, it's like, how do you set the goals to do it and get a plan in place to do it?
Yeah. Did you hear, were you in the session yesterday where Ricardo Alessia talked about some of the challenges, and he's an affordable operator, not fee managed owner operator, about long-term leases. And, I think they settled on 24 months. I knew that at one point they were considering 3 years.
Yeah.
Because of just trying to get through the wave. I was curious what your thoughts were about doing it in these, let me preface it, the country obviously has different regions, different pockets, but specifically we have quite a few customers in the Sunbelt states. So there's some really challenging markets that have a surge of supply that is still coming. Yeah. So they're struggling with occupancy right now. Economic occupancy is getting really tight. Cash management skills are coming into play. Yeah. And the surge is not even close to done. Yeah. So, would you do something would you do that? And I
think by situation. I mean, if I was doing a lease up today in a market that's delivering 6,000 units, I would do 24-month leases all day long, especially if it was a high number of units that are delivering. Yeah. Because you don't want those leases expiring while you're trying to finish the lease up. Because we used to lease things up in 9 months, and now it might take 24 months.
Good point.
When it comes to, and I think his situation is unique because he talked a little bit about, the affordable side. Now, some of the concessions have taken rents down to where his rates are, and that's you're competing against a whole different thing there. Yeah. So that's difficult. But I think the more that you can look at what your profile looks like. I mean, I'm an optimist, which probably doesn't help me in some cases. But I think lease ups definitely, I think you need to, I remember back in the Summit days, we had 0 leases expiring in the November, December, and January. I think that's really smart still to this day because we always complain about these seasonal changes, right? So how do we get that out of there? But,
that's where I learned it.
Yeah. I think you can't, you've got to, again, go back to what your residents want. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm a young professional living in an apartment community today and you tell me I need to sign a 24-month lease, I'm probably going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to move because I want flexibility. So I think you have to adapt it to what people want. There might be some people that want a 24-month lease, but.
And that just adds a little bit of.
It gives you flexibility.
Yeah. And just some stability built into.
Yeah. But
a build off of. Yeah.
But really planning out how you do it. But, again, it goes back to retention. Like the more you can spend time and really find out. If somebody came to me today and said, I would like to extend my lease for 3 months or 4 months, I'd be like, okay, let's do that right now. Yeah. And maybe or maybe not, there's extra charge to that. Like, I think you have to be really flexible about what your goals are. Because if I can get that lease to expire in August instead of, April, maybe it's better. Yeah.
And you're pushing out the turn costs, which maybe is a good thing because if they need it, right? Versus someone coming into a brand new that wants a 3 or 4 month lease. Because I think that was the thing during the great financial crisis we changed. Because there was a point where it seemed like there was a desperation. Just take anybody that'll come in, 4 months, 5 month leases. And you're right. But then we're having gently loved units in our brand new lease up, competing with other lease ups. But I think that was, and it was crazy at the time. Like we eliminated all locator fees, all of them on one of these assets. And we also eliminated all short-term leases. We didn't do anything less than 12 months. But that helped us ride through 2008 and 9. Yeah. And by 10, we were positioned well to come out. And we actually had pretty good first quarter 2010.
I think we always pull out the, what should I be doing in this market? And, there for a while we were like, oh, let's get, a bunch of Airbnb units. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe there's some people want flexibility. And so maybe if you're in a great market, that might be an option. But I think you just have to really look at your asset and what the character is around it before you can't set it across your whole portfolio and say, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
Because it just doesn't.
Take it by property and be flexible.
Yeah.
I like that. Be flexible and be agile in your thinking.
Yeah. I mean, and, sometimes it's great to get all those corporate leases that came in, hey, we need 25 apartments and those are great. But what's the odds of you and when are they going to expire? And there's so many different things to think about. But, again, but the one thing we didn't talk about is really understanding what your owner's objectives are.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
Because if they have the ability, if they want heads on beds and they want you to lease up in that 12 months versus the 24 months, then your pricing is going to change, right? And your concessions or whatever. But you've got to invest in what the owner wants, and that's going to kind of drive what your ultimate decisions are, I guess.
And then deal as an operator with whatever they did or did not do well in financing the property.
Well, and lender requirements too, right?
Yep.
So,
well, I have one last question for you. And this is an easy one for you. What is one thing about you that would surprise people?
I thought about this a lot when you sent me over kind of a bunch of prep questions, and I feel like I'm a pretty transparent person. I'm a country girl at heart, so I love all things like gardening, and I love to be in the kitchen and cooking, and that's kind of my safe space. Mm-hmm. But I'm not a recipe follower. I'm a winger. Mm-hmm. So I don't ever, but I think, when it comes to work, I think I have kind of a rough exterior sometimes or maybe it's not rough, but it's a direct exterior.
Because you told me that, and sometimes people feel like, you told me a story about somebody being intimidated by your glasses.
Yeah, that was my favorite story. But I think, I think people, what they don't know about me is that I care more than you can ever imagine. When somebody on my team is hurting, I hurt and I worry about them. Just like I worry about my kids, I worry about people all the time. And I think that's one thing that people don't always see on the surface of me, because I don't always, I'm going to ask them about things, but I don't always, they don't see that first thing, because I am kind of get business done kind of person. Yeah. So that's their first impressions of me.
Yeah, you definitely remember when we were talking, I thought, first of all, I thought, too bad we didn't work directly together because we would have had a blast. But I also think we would have killed it. There would have been that too. But you definitely struck me. I think the thing I walked away from the first time that I was so impressed with is I definitely got a sense that you're the kind of person that is going to hold people accountable. Yeah. Definitely. And you're going to push them, but you're invested in their success. It's not about yours.
It's not about.
And that just did not take long to come true.
Yeah.
And I think that makes for a really special leader. And that's the kind of person people want to work for. And you can do amazing. That attitude towards them also helps them have really great careers and do things in life. So,
well, people are the essence of our business. And I'd love nothing more than to watch somebody's light bulb go off and to watch them grow and get better. Yeah. And so that's the one thing. And I talk about it all the time. It's like, it used to be about me kind of climbing ladders and stuff, but not anymore. It's really about where I can leave my mark on somebody that they can grow and be better and reach their goals. So.
Okay. So, and as we wrap up, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, could they just do it via LinkedIn?
Yes, they can.
Because I was just going to say, I think you have your personal email right now, but I don't know if you want to give that out. So how about LinkedIn?
Yes, please reach out to me.
I know you respond. I've tested it.
Yeah, I do respond. And like I said, the best part of me going through the journey I am right now is that I've met an amazing amount of new people that have just really enriched my viewpoint on this business. So it's very exciting.
Wow. You're in for exciting times and have first grandchildren?
I have twins coming.
Yeah.
Well, I don't, but my daughter does.
I was going to say, wow, you look great.
A little.
No, well, thank you so much for coming and just for coming down here and experiencing this.
No, thank you. This has been great, and I've loved getting to know you and spending time with you. And Resmania has been fantastic. It's just enlightening to see what you're doing here. So,
well,
nice
thank
job.
you for that. And I hope everybody was as welcoming. My perception is we're a very unique base of customers that are just all in together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's pretty
Good
cool.
group of people.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Yay. I'm so glad you're here. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining PropTalk. This is a podcast that is powered by Resman. And if you want to learn more about the Resman ecosystem, please check us out wherever you get your podcasts on Spotify, Apple Music. And we'll just see you next time. Hope you guys enjoy. We get to wave to you.
Cheers.
Oh, wait, we got to do our cheers. Job well done. Yay. I had more of my breakfast than you did.